You. Just give it a couple of seconds as people trickle in to get started. So I think it looks like we've hit steady state for the time being. So without further ado, we'll get started. Good evening and welcome to the Grocery Rebooted panel hosted by George Mason University School of Business, Center for Retail Transformation. My name is Gautam Vatkepat, and I'm an associate professor at the School of Business and the director for the Center for Retail Transformation. Globally, the food and grocery retail market is valued at about $1 trillion in 2019, a few $1 trillion in 2019. As with most elements of retail, COVID has wreaked havoc and has caused the retail's grocery sector to change. To discuss the changing grocery sector and the future of grocery retail, we're joined by four amazing panelists that I'll introduce now. First and foremost, Aspa Lekka, COO and co-founder of JOKR, and it's one of the most popular startups in the domain of instant delivery at hyperlocal scale. If I remember correctly, JOKR recently raised about 170 million or so to fund their market expansion, and they're now in New York City trying to build out the US aspect of JOKR. Next, we have Brendan, who lives and breathes grocery retail. Brendan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've been in retail from the time you graduated from your college, if I remember correctly. And Brendan is the CEO, was a former CEO and president of Lidl USA, Ireland, Austria. I think I'm missing a few other places, but welcome, Brendan. Thank you for your time. Next, we have our own version of Tony Stark's, with the background, nice background. Cyra Richardson joins us as the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Product Officer at Attabotics, a 3D robotic supply chain system company that was named by Fast Company as one of the 50 most innovative companies in 2020. Welcome, Cyra. Look forward to hearing your aspects of the future of grocery. Last but not the least, Dave Steck, VP of IT, Infrastructure and Application Development at Schnucks Market. Dave was recently named as a top 10 mover and shaker in retail. Dave is kind of a very quiet person and did not like that shout out, I'm sure. Schnucks Market itself is a very progressive retailer that was the first, if I remember correctly, to deploy store-wide self-scanning robots into their daily operation. So welcome, Dave. Thank you, and we look forward to a really stimulating hour or so of discussion. Now, Aspa has to leave us in about 6 o'clock, so without further ado, I want to kind of jump into the crux of our panel discussion. And to kick things off, I'm going to turn the floor to Aspa. Aspa, rapid delivery is the hottest thing, right? Everywhere I look, there is discussion about rapid delivery. Wall Street Journal just had an article a couple of days ago about it. My own understanding and my reading is that according to PitchBook data, about $3 billion have been invested into this space as reported by Bloomberg. But a lot of the students and people in general don't understand what rapid delivery is. I was talking to my students and they asked the question, and it's a very pertinent question. It took them 15 minutes to get into the car and drive to the store. So how can a company such as JOKR kind of deliver products to the doorstep within that time frame? Could you just walk us through the fundamentals of the rapid grocery delivery model, how JOKR does it?
Absolutely. Great also to be here and have a chance to just speak and say more about JOKR. So the rapid grocery delivery in my head is what was the next day delivery a couple of years ago. So it's the next thing, and bringing the consumers closer to the goods and whatever they want to buy. The business model is very simple. Is vertically integrated retail store with a hyper-local delivery zone. So what we do is we lease a space, we identify what is the right locations to put together a store. We source directly the products from the suppliers. So we identify what is the right assortment, who is the right supplier to procure the products from, what is the right pricing, what is the right content for these products. And then we list the products online. Consumers can purchase them through the application, which they download. And then we deliver directly to the doorstep. Now, the 15 minutes proposition consists of a time that takes us to pick the order, and that is below 2 to 3 minutes, primarily because the store is organized in such a way that is efficient for picking operations. It doesn't matter to look nice for the consumer or to be intuitive towards the consumer, because the pickers have their own application and their own process of how to pick which item. So that takes about 2 to 3 minutes. And then the delivery radius that we deliver to the consumer is calculated to be approximately 9 minutes. So from the time the driver leaves the store all the way to reach the consumer is about 9 minutes. So altogether, that makes about 11 to 12 minutes, and you have a few minutes buffer in between. This model makes a lot of brings the opportunity. What this model does primarily is bringing the store very close to the consumer, brings the assortment very close to the consumer, and then from there we run the last mile a lot more efficiently. And there has been a lot of such models. I think it's just the next step evolution from the next day delivery, and taking a lot of the advantages and the learnings that have been so far generated from the food delivery companies that they have also, I think, developed and boomed over the last few years.
That's awesome. So thank you for the very quick overview of how Rapid Grocery works. So it looks like the key idea here is trying to deliver very quickly to the store. So it's a convenience play for most of the consumers, and you're giving them back their time to do for other things. But I heard two things in there. One is that the people are picking the products themselves. So it's a separate store. It's not a store that's open to the general consumer. Is that correct?
That is right.
So it's, and also in addition to that, you said 2 to 3 minutes of picking time. So that's really a very limited. I'm just thinking about my own experiences. I take an hour to pick stuff at the grocery store. Clearly, I'm very inefficient. So does that mean you have limited number of assortments that allow people the pickers to pick products very efficiently?
Yes, so there is a couple of things underlying and what this model does differently. So at the first glance, it seems that we operate a store that's like a small bodega that feeds to 3,000 SKUs, very efficiently organized. And then the consumers can scroll into their application and they find what products they want to buy and they put them into the basket they purchase. In reality, we are trying to solve for this problem a little bit differently, and we're trying to also make it efficiently across different levels. So number one is, if you judge also by your own sales, but also the rest of the consumers, most of the consumers are probably buying somewhere between 70 to 150 products from the grocery store. Maybe the experiment amount over the other, but if you also go through your own basket, you wouldn't find a lot of more products going out and that you have purchased from a supermarket with an assortment of, let's say, 15,000 SKUs. So what we need to do, what we try to do with the technology is trying to understand each consumer, each individual consumer, what is the right assortment for them? Regardless of what are the 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 products we carry, each consumer has their own shopping patterns and their own preference. And especially for a model that allows for such a quick delivery, each consumer has the opportunity we have the opportunity to understand what each consumer buys, but also when they buy the certain product. So the whole mindset is get what you want and what you need. And that now allows us to a lot better curate the product for the consumer. You say you go to the supermarket, you take an hour. It's probably because you stroll around the shelf trying to figure out what is the perfect dinner recipe. Happens to me all the time. End up doing eggs again. Yeah. But what we want to do now is to create this as an app that is very similar to how you go into Instagram and you get inspired. And then based on how we understand consumers and the taste preferences and the purchase patterns, we can help them see the content that's relevant for them. So even if we say it's 3,000 products, then out of this 3,000, probably 100 or 200 would be relevant for each individual consumer. And again, this consumer is part of a hyper-local consumer group, which they live within this area, this neighborhood that is almost 2 miles radius within our polygon. And by also understanding what our consumers within this hyper-local area purchase, we can much better than equip our hubs. So these 3,000 products that a normal bottega would fit out of 3,000 square feet, that is the average size of our stores, we can now fit a lot more products. So potentially at a point in time, we can fit 3,000 products, which could then become 4,000 and 5,000 products by carrying the right quantities, because we understand what consumers buy and when. We no longer need to carry the full case. We can carry each product that is selling. But also we can understand that what consumers buy on a Monday morning is very different to what consumers buy on a Friday evening. That means that a whole selection of 1,000, 2,000 products that they are relevant for a Monday morning become obsolete for a Friday evening, and there is another 2,000. So even though it's a store that at a point in time carries 3,000 SKUs, throughout the week, that number of products that we carry in our assortment can grow exponentially into 7, 8, 10,000 products, which are the most relevant to the individual consumer, and they are, in a macro level, the most relevant for the specific neighborhood. And this is how we change the experience and how we want to change retail. Clearly, that relies on a mid-mile logistics and supply chain that's very efficient, and we can fulfill and deliver to our stores in a much efficient way, and very well understand what sells, what the consumers want, and have it there before they even order it. But this is the fundamental difference between an online bottega that delivers in 15 minutes and what we are trying to do with the new technology and building JOKR.
So in essence, you are redefining both the customer experience as well as the supply chain by being a technology and a data company, right? So you're using data, hyper-local data, to figure out what's the product that sells at what time and kind of getting it to the consumer in a very short window. Excellent. So I think now I understand better what instant grocery is. And I'm going to kick it out to the panel to kind of get their thoughts on, there is a lot of debate about rapid grocery, and so instant grocery, whatever your term is, and get your thoughts on this. So, Brendan, maybe we can start off with you from your perspective as being a CEO, former CEO. How do you see rapid grocery in the larger landscape of grocery retail?
Yeah, I think, to look at it, I think you need to, in general, look at the grocery landscape. And, when we talk about that in the US, I think it depends very much what part of the US you're in, what corner of the US you're in, because those markets vary quite a bit. But I think it's fair to say that in general, for retail over the last years, grocery retail in particular hasn't been very innovative in general. And, when I say that, I think you do need to separate it into two groups. For me, particularly when you think of the large national grocery retailers, I think there's been a very little innovation in those areas. I think when you get to more regional players or local players, there's been a lot more innovation. You'll see that in their stores because they've needed to differentiate themselves and they've needed to find a way to become more applicable. So for me, I think, if you look at that and you look at these main grocers, basically, their business has been chipped away at from multiple sides. We talked about, so wherever you are, pretty much in the US now, you have access to online bulk purchase from, you've the likes of Amazon, Box, Chewy. You have actually PepsiCo now have actual direct to consumer. You can buy bulk juices, snacks delivered to your door. And so that's chipping away at grocery retail in general. of the the physical store as it was. Then on top of that, you have the likes of JOKR and the concept that JOKR have of the rapid delivery groceries, and I can see why that's sought after, and I can see why that's being pushed, particularly in large, dense populated areas. If I think of New York, which is in a lot of ways basically the battleground in grocery, certainly at the moment, I think, and going forward over the next year or two, you have the rapid delivery there that people are looking for. There's not a lot of easy shopping experiences when it comes to grocery in New York. Often there's not a lot of them there, and on top of that, you have the likes of Kroger, the Kroger or Ocado relationship. So Ocado relationship. So they're going up and they're looking to deliver into the same people as Amazon Fresh, as the other grocery retailers are there. So I think it's going to be a very, very competitive landscape. And the reality with grocery is all of us are aware is that it's a fairly small margin business, and efficiencies drive your success, and therefore it's like Aspa had said, getting those efficiencies under the model is critical. It's going to be critical going forward. And on top of that, you have discussions like Instacart, are they going to do dark stores? Are Uber going to do deliveries, instant deliveries? You have the discounters, of course, Aldi, Lidl, grocery outlet expanding as well. So there's a lot of people chipping away at the grocery model as it was. And I think that's an exciting time, because that actually, will lead to a lot of innovation, and, the most efficient players will succeed, in my opinion. That's usually how it plays out. If they can get to the scale and get the pricing for the products and get the offering right for the customer, that's ultimately what it is. And if you can do that, it's going to be a very exciting market for sure.
Excellent. Thank you. As for Brendan raised this point, right? So I've heard this many times that this model works in high density areas. The rapid delivery, is that the case, or is it applicable even to other? Can you just take a little bit about that aspect, just maybe a minute or so?
Definitely is best suited for high density areas, and there is actually a lot of opportunities. The way we've decided where to expand and which cities to expand in areas, we've looked exactly into what is the population density, what's the target demographics, what the food consumption, what is the addressable market for each of the stores that we're put together, and we've prioritized the areas. There are opportunities to move to lower dense areas. You could definitely not go to something that's a rural area. It's not the right model to be there for sure. But you could also look into smaller cities by changing slightly the SLA to the consumer and being a little bit more flexible for the 50 minutes. Right now, we expect all of our orders to be delivered within 50 minutes. You can increase slightly the driving distance and make it 20 or 20 up to 20 or 25 minutes. And I think that gives the opportunity to be a lot more efficient in the operations. And again, it's two things that we're trying to solve for together. Number one is bringing the convenience of getting the groceries at the right time, but the other part is also a better experience when it comes to grocery. And I very much agree, there is a habit, we all grew up going to the supermarket and purchasing in a certain pattern. But if we are also critical, this is we can use this time so much more efficiently if we know that we can pay the same price without being charged more. We can, or maybe phrase it this way, if we have the opportunity to pay the same amount of money without putting this effort, we're definitely better off doing something else.
True. Good. Dave, we got a lot of questions coming in. So Dave, can you talk about, from your perspective, what's your viewpoint on rapid grocery delivery? Like for a smaller grocer, right? You see these big companies, the Tesco and Carrefour, trying to build partnerships. What do you see with a smaller regional grocer? You're not small. How would they react? And what do you see? Do you see them implementing rapid grocery? Because as Aspa talked, it's a completely different way of thinking about grocery.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty interesting. I don't have much to add to what Brendan said, but I would say I agree with Aspa on it doesn't necessarily have to be in the highly dense areas. If you look at even St. Louis, for example, where we're headquartered, there are a number of areas that are food deserts. And if you can find a model that can service people in those food desert locations and hit the price point, then you have a very competitive offering. There's lots of people that are trying to figure that out now. I mean, we've got people with a mobile grocery store that has a big motor home that they drive into the food deserts to try to help service these people. So there's a number of plays for it. For me, I'd be interested to see the supply chain logistics on how you can distribute to that many different locations. But you know, I'm from the show me state, so show me. I think it's an interesting model, but I agree with too. I think Instacart can react as well. From our perspective, it's not next day. In our stores, we can deliver within 1 hour. So is there a big differentiation between 15 minutes and 1 hour? And then you get a full assortment. So it'd be interesting.
So as far, maybe you could talk about that, right? You're changing the supply chain as well, right? And I personally think you're changing the customer experience and expectations, that I'm not going to stock up the fridge for that much because I know there is this possibility. Can you just talk, since we're pressing against time, how do you see rapid grocery kind of changing the way the supply chain as well as the customer experience?
Yes, of course. So also like to link it back to the Instacart and other companies model, what we see is for this type of micro fulfillment model operations, you need a different infrastructure that Instacart doesn't have. I agree with the 1 hour is different, but Instacart also at this point of time works with third-party supermarkets that already have lower margins, which relies to a higher markup to compensate for the stores, and less efficient operations for not understanding exactly what is the assortment in there. So going back to the customer experience and the supply chain. So we're changing a lot into how the customer experience happens, because you have the reliability of the time. We know exactly where item is located. We know exactly what is in this assortment. We know how long it's going to take. So it's a vertically integrated model compared to a marketplace model. I think that makes it easier for the consumer. It's more reliable towards the consumer. On top of that, we're building the technological infrastructure to allow for consumers to see relevant, curate the content, show them what they want, and carry what consumers want and when they need it into the store, which given that we are vertically integrated, we have the opportunity to adjust our product. On the supply chain part, one aspect that I mentioned is this whole replenishing the stores from the distribution center and make this much more efficient. So thinking differently about the assortment at the point in time and the assortment throughout a week or throughout a month. This is number one, something that we're looking a lot is to the dynamic assortment and just bringing real time, doing the replenishment real time and as efficient as possible. Number two is we want to open the supply chain and work with a lot of more local suppliers. Right now, you see most of the bigger retailers have such processes in place that makes it fairly hard for them to justify working with local players and local suppliers, also for local suppliers to work with them. And I think our model being hyper local, it could be that one of our small stores can very efficiently work with the local farmer, with the local cupcake brand. We're building also technology and tools that allow smaller suppliers to work with us and be efficient, because we have a lot of points into our supply chain for products to enter. It doesn't always have to go through a big distribution center and then being distributed to the stores. It can also directly come to the stores. That clearly that's not going to be 200% of the locations, but gives access points for smaller players and suppliers to work with us, which I think gives an opportunity to democratize a lot of big parts of the supply chain, make it more efficient. And I think then also just utilize space and a lot more efficient that it happens at the static bodega in store.
Let me get Sarah's thought on, and then I'll just, Aspa, you can go through the questions to figure out which one you want to answer. But Sarah, what are your thoughts on the rapid grocery delivery and how automation can help or, change in the space of rapid grocery?
Well, it's a hard act to follow. I mean, I think Brendan and Aspa made really great points. I loved Aspa's points about a community. And how can you mobilize a community? If you think about just the past year in grocery in general, grocery grows, at least in North America, about 1% to 2% a year. In 2020, I think it grew about 12.5%, which is, huge growth. And out of that, e-groceries grown proportionally at the same time about 4% a year. Last year, it grew about 15%. So we're seeing folks move, partially because of COVID, to this model where getting delivery or fast access curbside delivery is really interesting to folks. So I see there, McKinsey did a great article about the state of e-grocery in 2021. They go through some of this. If you think about the major brands like Walmart and Amazon and others, they really have this vertically integrated supply chain. They have a community effectively that, spans the entire supply chain. So, much as Aspa mentioned, we see this environment where we can help communities have tiers of supply chains where you might have a network, we call it network supply chain.
Nice.
We may have a large tiered storage facility that is high density. But you also have micro fulfillment centers that are in neighborhoods, and even potentially, nano-sized fulfillment centers that are like lockers, where you can go and pick up your groceries if you don't want to have something delivered. As you look at robotics, part of the challenge is that last mile or last 15 feet is really challenging. And so this, opportunity of, instead of thinking about standalone storage, standalone facilities, actually having multi-tenant supply chain, I think would really help many of the competitors in this end of the market.
Thank you. Aspa, I know you pressed against time. Do you want to answer one or two questions before you take your leave?
Yes, happy to. I think there is a very interesting question about thoughts on pairing instant delivery with physical retail locations. Does it make sense to turn micro-fulfillment centers into stores? We've thought a lot about that, and we don't. I think grocery is a great entry point nowadays, but consumers need instantly. But we definitely see that beyond that, and I feel the model and creating these stores and these nodes inside a city allows you to be within 15 minutes of the consumers in a big location. So I think groceries is from the beginning. There is a lot of opportunities, and we already have discussions and ideas of how we can expand this model to carry a lot more products and serve as a micro-fulfillment center for other retail locations and be the sorting center, so to speak, for pretty much all retail stores that they exist in the city. So I think there is opportunities for this model to disrupt beyond groceries, but also retail and the last delivery. There is another question that will be the last to respond about the demand, whether the demand spike can create increase the delivery time and hence put some doubts on the customer proposition. One part that we are working very closely with and built good tools around is this forecasting, planning and forecasting. Clearly, we do that. We forecast the demand from the consumers in terms of products, and then have enough at the location. But we do exactly the same part when it comes to scheduling the last mile. So we do predict what is the demand, what's the distribution at what time of the day, and then we adjust the scheduling of our workforce accordingly. We do work with W2, so we do employ the people, but then how we can mix and match the shifts and the hours that people work are in such a way that we allow for our promise to be always followed towards the consumer. So there is a lot of data-driven approaches that we can work together and fix.
Excellent. Thank you. I know you're against time, so thank you, Aspa. And if students or others have questions, I'm sure they'll reach out to you. You've been very wonderful. I learned a lot. Thank you, and good luck with your next meeting.
I'm glad it's helpful. Great being here, and have a great evening. All apologies, I have to drop.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Bye. All right, so now let's switch to the next aspect of our conversation, which is automation, right? If there are two things that is really hot in retail in general, one is rapid grocery. We spent about 20 minutes on it, and next is automation. And anywhere you look, you're hearing news about warehouse fulfillment robots, store scanning robots, and so forth. And that's a completely different environment from where grocery retail used to be. So I want to start things off by perhaps talking, Dave, Schnucks was in the news just recently, being the first store to kind of deploy shelf scanning robots all across their stores nationwide. And I think you started trying these out like in 2017 or 16 or something a long time ago. So I'm curious as to what got you going on this journey, and where do you see this evolving? What are the opportunities for automation from a grocer perspective?
Yes, how we got started is kind of interesting. It was my boss, who's our Chief Information and Supply Chain Officer, ran into Simbi Robotics at a FMI conference. And he got back, he threw the card on my desk and he said, "Hey, give Simbi a call. I think, this has a play." So it was kind of what we called for about 2 years a science experiment. It's one of the nice things about Schnucks is we have one of our tenets is try new things. So we're encouraged to innovate. And so we did reach out to Simbi, did some initial reviews of the robots. Basically looked at it from a PowerPoint viewpoint. Simbi came in, showed us what their capabilities were on being able to detect out on shelf. Then after a couple of years of piloting and doing other things and doing some kind of rudimentary integration into our store operations, we really got pretty serious about it. We expanded to 16 stores. We did a full deep dive ROI analysis on it. And showed that the robot does, even in the smallest volume stores, it pays for itself out on shelf notifications and helping us manage the shelf condition. And then it actually gets much more into the black when you add in missing promotional tags and things like that, when you start looking at the shelf tag itself and understanding that. So it's been a long journey. We were in 62 stores as of July of was it this year? Yeah, and then we announced that we were going to expand to the entire chain before the end of the year. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. We went, Halloween was around the corner, right? And we went to the stores to pick up a hairspray for my daughter. We looked online and we saw it was there, and then we went there and it was not there. And I was like, man, this is an exact scenario where I wish there were shelf scanning robots that would actually let me know, because we went irate. But like, my daughter was throwing a hissy fit all over the place, and we could not do anything to stop her. She's just 4 years old. So I love the idea of where automation can help the customer experience. But Dave, could you talk a little bit about the supply chain angle as well, right? Like, it can actually significantly improve supply. Maybe, I don't know. I am a student of the space, so just let me know.
It's an interesting thing when we first put it in. We knew there was going to be a lot of data there. Now, what you do with that data is the interesting thing. So we have a whole data science team that looks at this, and where we ended up, and everybody thinks this is like really simple. Well, and I know Brendan's going to laugh when I say this. It's you ship stuff to the store. You know what you ship to the store. You know what you sold out the front end. So why does perpetual inventory numbers drift. It's not that simple.
That was my question to him.
Yeah, it is a very difficult thing to get right. You have human factors throughout the entire supply chain. Number one, you think that there's 12 items in the case and the CPG changed it to 10. You didn't know it. So now you're shorted 2 items. You have a picker in a distribution center that is having a bad day and they say, oh, I drove by and I picked up those 2 cases and I threw them on the pallet jack, but they just drove by, read the check digit and didn't get off. And it gets to the store and you're short the cases completely. The checker on the front end is scanning things incorrectly. They see Diet Coke and Coke and they scan the Coke twice and they're done. There's theft. There's all sorts of factors that influence this, and it's not a simple solution. But what we found, and for us, we're actually kind of on the better side of this, is that of the items that we detect as out on shelf, about 30% of those we believe to be correctable at the store level. So that is, it's in the back room or it's on display somewhere else, or the perpetual inventory number did drift off and the store teammates just need to tell us, hey, we really don't have this here. The other 70% of those items are further up in the food chain, in the supply chain, and trying to understand what is it about those items now that is keeping it from getting to the store. Obviously, in today's world with all the supplier shortages and whatnot, a lot of that is just we can't get the product. But some of it could be the buyers aren't ordering it soon enough. There's all sorts of different AI-based rules with supply chain, and some of those are just wrong. So we're trying to, you can refine those, tune those, and as you spend more and more time with this, it's going to get, for us, it's going to get better because we're learning more about where the failures are in the process.
So that sounds like most of the robotics has been used for human error correction and ensuring there is inventory that's displayed on time when customers need it. Is that a fair assessment of the current use?
That's sort of the fair. So we are looking for missing promotional tags as well.
Yeah.
Because the lift actually associated with promotions, if you're missing 3 to 5% of your promotions, your lift associated with promotion is greater than the revenue that you're going to generate by the out on shelf.
Oh, wow.
So you want to make sure that those tags are getting hung. So we're auditing that. The other thing too is, and Aspa talked about it a little bit, we're collecting XYZ coordinates for every single product that's in the store. We know exactly where that item is. So from our customer's perspective, we have within our app the ability to build your shopping list. We geofence our stores. You walk into a store that you're not familiar with, we know that you're in a different store. We're going to sort your shopping list for you for the sequence of that store.
Yeah.
We provide that feed to Instacart. So Instacart shoppers now can use that to get through our store much more quickly. So you have the embedded shopper with Instacart that typically knows the store pretty well because they're there all the time. But then you have the 1099 gig workers that are doing the shopping and the delivery, and they don't know that store. If you can give them that information, they can get their shop done much more quickly.
So, resident Tony Stark. So, Attabotics raised a lot of money recently, I think, to kind of transform grocery fulfillment. Can you just share a little bit about your perspective? Dave spoke about inventory management within. Talk about warehouse automation, where you see this going, and what you think the future is from that perspective of what Attabotics does and other companies in the space are doing.
Yeah, I think Dave and Brendan made some really good points. Dave's point about there are always people involved. These are human machine partnerships or teams that are working together. And there's certainly errors that happen in the system that you need to correct. When you think about some of Dave's points around how do you manage the supply chain, again, as you think about a smaller grocer working independently, that's much harder to do than if you had a collection of grocers or a network of grocers. The more that we can work together to have a network of inventory that's shared across brands and retailers, the more opportunity there is to potentially cross-sell, to gain economies of scale. A grocery consortium across a large enough population could have the same sort of impact that major nationwide retailer could have. And so this is why our network supply chain idea and that we're actually building out now is this notion of how do I create this network where retailers, brands can share inventory across tiers of storage. And the really exciting part is that we believe we can have that product available in 2 hours for most of these folks, given a reasonable amount of last mile delivery. We think we can have much of the product available because our storage system, our 3D storage system, takes about 15% of the space that a traditional pallet-based storage system would use. And we have robots that, as Dave mentioned, knows exactly where the product is. You say, here are the products I need. The picker is standing at the workstation, puts everything in a reusable container. We use these plastic containers and give it to a person, either give it to the customer who picks it up at the grocery store or to a last mile delivery partner that would deliver it. So, we believe that 2-hour delivery is absolutely realistic, especially in these high density areas. Now, if you think about it, 70% of the fulfillment cost, today is roughly in that delivery time. So we really think it's important to give customers, and I think McKinsey and others sort of back this up, the option to pick it up at the store, the option to pick it up at a central location, or to pay the premium to get the product delivered to them.
I actually find that a really interesting idea where the small retailers can band together to actually build out their own fulfillment center that can allow them to gain efficiencies that independently they cannot, right? And
well, it's a little bit like, think about these data centers that Microsoft and Amazon have built. They don't have just one customer in those data centers. They have multiple customers in those data centers. This is exactly the same. The other metaphor that might resonate more with retailers is, this is a lot like a mall. If you look at a mall, you share parking spaces, you share common services, and this is very similar to that mall concept, except having, the logistics back end that you're sharing across your partners.
With at least this year holiday season, with the supply chain problems, networks such as that might be helpful for the smaller retailers. So that's really fascinating. Maybe Brendan, to kind of put a bow on these things, there's several questions out here on human robot interface, which I would like to get to. But what's your take on this? Where do you see this going? What do you see where it's most applicable and so forth?
What I find very interesting just about, what Dave and Cyra have been saying is, I think the reality of it is, particularly depending, as we say, what part of the US you're looking at, but there's a lot of areas, for example, the Northeast, which are extremely difficult to get in, to acquire sites, to get permitting, to get businesses open. And that's very, very restricted for businesses that aren't already there. But being able to use the likes of micro-fulfillment centers, shared micro-fulfillment centers, I can understand that could be a way forward for a lot of other businesses to get closer to these markets. I mean, some of these markets are just out of reach for so many retailers, and the lead time to trade in those areas is so long that the likes of the micro-fulfillment really gives you the ability to get in there and access the customers. So I think that's very interesting. I certainly found that very interesting. And I think when it comes to robotics, for me, with my background, I suppose, when I think of robotics, I primarily see them as a, if you will, as a kind of a back of house, or as a micro fulfillment center, dark store concept. And I say that just because, the experience in the shop, in the grocery store, I mean, obviously, Dave, you have experience there with the basically with the robot and the inventory control and the availability on the shelves. And I can get that because I'm sure you have control there as to when and where that goes in the store, what flow, and therefore there's minimal disruption to the customer on the shop floor. Whereas I believe if there were more robotics being taken into a store, it could become detrimental, if you will, to the offering for the customer, because we already hear from multiple locations, the challenges that some locations have with, where customers are complaining about the shoppers from Instacart in front of them. They're on times, they're running through stores. That can be a disadvantage, obviously, for other customers in the store. So, I think that's interesting, but I would primarily see it then as, if you will, as a back of house benefit. Dark stores, I think, are very, very interesting for the reason that permitting is easier to do. They're a lot more efficient. If you think of traditional grocers, I mean, the legacy cost structure that grocers have is the single biggest challenge as we move forward. There's a lot of square footage there's a lot of stock in those stores. They're expensive to own, to maintain, and to look after. And therefore, the ability to have a dark store where you can focus purely on efficiencies, I understand how that's, obviously very, very interesting for a lot of businesses. For me, I think the challenge then is just how you establish your brand, how you make your brand aware, because as well as the product that you're offering and the service, you need to build the brand around that. So I suppose ultimately, that mix of, brick and mortar store, which establishes your brand, and the accessibility to your rapid delivery, your micro fulfillment, I think is, ultimately where we will end up is with the combination of those, whatever that ultimately looks like. Maybe I would imagine a mix of, some stores with small micro fulfillment facilities built into them, other stores with larger standalone units, obviously. I imagine it'll be a combination of all of these that will move through in the next years as, we ultimately get closer to that ideal efficiency that's out there. And, I think if we're, when I've spoken to a lot of companies over the last 6 months in particular, and when it comes to the solutions, what they found is that with the pandemic, people had to switch on solutions very fast. The two key options were click and collect, and the other one was third party. So the likes of Instacart, the likes of basically of shipped Instacart, picking and delivered for you, they were the easiest switch ons for people at that time. And I think that's what's happened, and that's what we've seen in the grocery market. And now that if you will, the initial, reaction stage is calming down, I think people now are looking forward to what the ideal solution is for them, because the reality of the two options that are there at the minute from, people I've spoken to is, between click and collect and third party, there seems to be a reduction, if you will, in third party servicing, and the demand for click and collect, I think, is holding steady or increasing from, people I've been speaking to. That's the information I've got. And I can understand that, because with the third parties, there's a lot of additional costs involved in it. And that's affecting, the shopping, the outgoings for a family. If you have premiums on the goods and delivery costs, for example, that's a heavy burden. If you're doing click and collect for the business, you're now paying employees to do the shopping, obviously, for your customers. And that's on a fairly small margin to begin with. And the information I've had is that at a best case scenario, those click and collect are break even, in a best case scenario, that it often costs money. Obviously, there's the advantages of volume, maintaining customers, growing customers, particularly in the last year, where the footfall or the drive towards, purchasing goods as opposed to eating out has increased substantially. So I think, I think businesses are definitely looking for the solution to bring down the costs of these to maximize the return. And the question is, how do you do that, balancing your real estate, your investments in the future, and ultimately, your staffing costs, which are a huge portion, obviously, of grocery retail. And for me, I think that's what's going to be very interesting is, technology advances as we move forward. And, Dave and Gary, you've probably read more about this in recent times than I have. But, when it comes to the just walk out technology, for example, I think that's a huge advancement as well. And I can see that as being part of the future. Personally, I mean, I think that's the way it has to go. Self-checkouts, we've talked previously about the fact that, when I came to the US 6.5 years ago, there were practically no self-checkouts in the US. Over the last 2 years, there's been a rapid implementation of those. But I think already, the future is looking like the just walk out technology, because I think there was an article that I'd seen just recently where Tesco did a full just walk out. I think the company's called Trigo, I think it is.
Yeah, Trigo retrofitted system.
Yeah, retrofitted.
Hang on a second. I want to, don't get into that right away, because I want to save that for the last. But I want to get kind of, I see the questions coming fast and furious. So
While you do that, I want to respond to one thing that Brendan said. I think
please go.
Brendan made just so many great points. One of them that I want to riff on a little bit is, it's not only about the technology, it's also about the business model. So providing, like you called it, quick turn on, I would say SaaS. If you can provide a SaaS business model, because many of the companies don't have sort of Dave's data science group that can do these predictions. So the more that these solutions provide insight and predictability through the supply chain, and even prediction based on externalities like influencers, the more real value that you're going to bring to these grocers.
I'm on mute as always. I actually agree with that 100%. And I was going to kind of ask the question. But the reason why I wanted to, I kind of interjected because we were getting into the future and what's going to kick, but I want to kind of keep this conversation focused on automation. There are a few really good questions in the chat box with regards to this. And Dave, maybe kind of getting back to your own experiences. How do you see automation impacting the human workforce in store? Right? You've been dealing with this. Perhaps could you be able to shed some light on what it's been like at a very high level, of course, and maybe Cyra, you too. I know you post a lot on these things, so we can go to you as well.
Yeah, I was reading ahead on some of the questions as well, so I'll try to knock out a couple of them here as we're
Great.
at it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting discussion when you get into the robot that's traversing the store, and people immediately jump to, well, that's taking jobs away. Well, it's not. It is a very, very difficult task for any store teammate to go through and scan outs. In some cases, you have to get down on all fours to look to the back of the shelf on the bottom. You got to stand on your tippy toes to look at the top of the shelf. It's just not something that can be done accurately. And so when we looked at it, we found that the robot was anywhere from 4 to 15 times more accurate on detecting an out on shelf. And then when you really think about it, is the little bit of hours that I was spending or allowing the store teams to spend to scan was meaningless when you consider the amount of product that I'm missing that I'm now shipping to the store. I need those hands to put that product away. So when we put the robot in, our business case didn't have anything to do with the labor side of the equation. It was all about the increase in revenue and the missing promotional tags and then the accuracy and all of that. We didn't talk about labor. So, as you get into micro fulfillment and whatnot, I'm not an expert on that, but again, every automation that we've done throughout the history has always resulted in different jobs. If you think of the world's population today, it's much larger than it was, 100 years ago, yet we've automated a lot of stuff and people are still working. So the jobs, they find a way to create themselves, and they always need support in some way. It's just a change of the skill set that's being driven here. And yeah, we still need more people in the service industries, and we need more hands there is obvious, but I don't see automation as something that's taking jobs away. Another question that I saw was,
hey Dave, can I just follow up on that one real quick? If
Yeah.
you look in sort of retail food, the turnover rate is above 100% a year. In grocery, it's 48% a year. In 2020, it was 72% turnover of employees. And so, I agree with you. It's not just that we're not taking jobs. There's actually a shortage of skilled workers in many of these, many of these industries. And, sometimes the only way to participate effectively is through automation.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that we're right there with the industry averages. So we're not an outlier. Another question was about electronic shelf labels. And yes, ESLs would help with promotional tag accuracy. But at the same time, you need something to verify that, because you can't always depend on that signal getting to that ESL. You can't always depend on the battery being alive in the ESL. So something needs to validate that what you believe to be true is true. There was another question about hacking the robots. I mean, obviously we've vetted these things, every way to Sunday to make sure that they're not hackable. So.
Awesome. Okay, is there anything else? No, there are no more questions that I think that we need to discuss. So now maybe we can pivot to the last section of the conversation before we open it up for more questions, which is, we've heard a lot about the dark store, micro fulfillment, robotics, rapid delivery, and all of that stuff, which is completely changing. Brendan was talking about this, right? It's completely changing the landscape, and it's chipping away at the margins of the larger supermarkets, and they're trying to figure out, so what is the future of grocery? Now, when you walk into the store in 2020, that's just 5 years away from, well, actually, what am I talking about? I'm still stuck in the past, right? Hey, I'm looking for the days which are way gone in the past. But if we move forward to 2025, let's say, what is grocery store going to look like? Or even further down, how different is it going to be? Are we going to see a lot more of these dark store, micro fulfillment? Are we going to see more of these, the larger supermarkets reacting but doing things to change their in-store experience? And Brendan, and this is where I cut you off, because you were kind of going in that direction of trying to tell where we were going, and I did not want you to get there as yet. So maybe we'll start things off with your thoughts, and then we can go around the room again to get some of these thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think the reality of it is, it's going to be a combination of everything that we have, and there'll be further advancements as well that we're not aware of. I mean, I think in 4 years, I'm not sure there'll be a revolution. I think in 10 years' time, certainly. I think in 4 years, yes, there'll be changes, because businesses are looking fast for ways to reduce the costs. But I think the models that are there, it'll be a combination of those. So it will be the brick and mortar store. It'll be the micro fulfillment, I believe, and there will be rapid delivery there. But I think the question is more, who will the key players be within those areas? And I think that's going to be dependent on who's able to, adapt their technology and adapt their systems quickly enough. But I think the reality of that as well is that, similar, I think, to what Cyra, you were saying, is I believe what will happen is it's going to be third-party developments of these concepts, of these models that's going to drive this forward. I mean, these are areas of expertise, and I know Dave, you've obviously done an awful lot of work in that, but I'm sure you could also account for the time that's invested in that, and learning, and the investments of time and money. And I think there will be a lot of third-party suppliers who will basically provide the solution for this. The question will be which retailers react how quickly to it, in my opinion. And if we were looking down into the future, I would, I could imagine a situation where your center store, if you will, and just thinking a little bit outside of the box, where your center store was pretty much all automated. Yeah. So all of your dry goods are all automated, and there's more time and effort invested in the experiences in the store, so that when you go into a store, that you could go in, pick up your goods that you already ordered, and you have the experience section where you go through the meat, the poultry, the fresh produce, where you get to go through and spend more time on those goods and simply walk out the door. And I think that would be a nice place ultimately to get to from a shopping experience. It's probably not what the CPG companies would like to hear, but I think these are possibilities for further down how I could imagine it playing out, because experience has shown us, and what we see from where these trends tend to be going is that there are a lot of products that people are comfortable ordering online. And those center stores, they're repeat purchases, and I count myself in that. There's repeat purchases that I have that don't change. And I would be comfortable to have those almost on a rolling automated basis, and then spend the time that I have on the nicer parts of the shopping experience, if you will. And I think that's further down the line, but that could be somewhere where we see ourselves in the future.
Nice. Either of you, Dave, Cyra, Kira, what's your thoughts on the future?
I would align with a lot with what Brendan said. I think we're all in the same industry, so we will align on that. I would add, he was talking about the just walk out technology. I would add that is an extremely expensive infrastructure in order to do, and obviously costs are going to go down. But I think there was a big telegraph move here that was just made. Instacart bought Caper Carts for $350 million. This was a company that only had $15 million of funding, hadn't been fully deployed at any grocer yet, and yet they were bought for $350 million. I think you look at the Caper Cart solution, there's other players out there as well, that if you can't get to this huge infrastructure that's required to do the Amazon just walk out technology, that cart technology, whether it's doing image recognition or scan into the cart and whatnot, is a huge play in the future. I also agree with the thought of the center store being more automated. In your experience, I think if you look at one of our stores that we just remodeled, we have 3 restaurants in one of our stores. So it's becoming not just a shopping experience, but a destination. And our flagship stores had a restaurant in it for 10, 15 years, and we've just expanded on that concept. So you'll see more of the grocery store being more than just a place to go get groceries. You can go have there's a bar there, you can get a drink, you can get your food, go out to dinner, whatever. There's going to be some consolidation.
Kira, your thoughts?
Wow, so many great ideas from these guys. I love the idea of the experience. I think it makes a lot of sense. When I used to work at Amazon, I used to run the mobile web shopping business, and this is when the iPhones were just coming out. One of the behaviors that we saw from customers was they would go into a big box store, look at an expensive product, and then buy it on their phone. And we used to call this showrooming, right? It was people going after this experience, but wanting the price and ease of delivery. And so I totally agree. We saw that in 2010, and I think that Brendan and Dave are spot on. It's only going to continue. The notion of friction-free checkout. Again, I worked on some of this at Microsoft in the AI and vision system, where they had stationary cameras looking at what people were picking up. The cart-based vision system, even with scanning and RFID tags, also looks really promising as a methodology to ease the friction. But I think you can whittle away at this. It doesn't need to be, hands-free. As I think Dave mentioned, it's a high CapEx cost. you're not going to do this overnight. You're going to do this after a remodel or when you put a new store in. And so I think we'll see this evolve over time as folks put new infrastructure in place. But the other piece too, I think that we may not be entirely sort of aware of is there's a generational change, right? My mom's a member of the Boomer. I'm a Gen X. Each of us have different shopping styles, different sensitivities about sharing data. And the more data you're willing to share, the more that my ML and AI algorithms can do to predict what you want when you want it. And the ultimate in friction-free shopping is you never have to shop for the things that you want again. They just show up when you want them, or they're at the pickup location on the way home. You get a text that says, hey, your food's at the locker up the street, come and pick it up on your way home. And then, just as Brendan and Dave said, you have special occasions where you want something new or different that you want to try out, and you go to this great sort of shopping experience to pick up.
That's interesting, right? Like if you can actually get to a state where the product is ready for you before you know it. I know that's a holy grail that people are trying towards. We had one question in the chat box, which is the future of in-home delivery. And I'm going to add one more question to that. One of the arguments I've been stating is that, mobile delivery is there, right? So you could actually, and you're seeing companies like Neuro and others doing that, where you could have mobile grocery delivered to your home. That's a completely different format that could be altering the grocery landscape as well. So just go around the room. What are your thoughts on some of these other things that we haven't discussed? In-home delivery, these mobile grocery that's kind of getting on. I see more and more companies, especially in China, doing it. Thoughts, anyone?
I think just from my side, I mean, similar to what I think Gary says, they're very interesting. The question is the scalability of them. And like if I think of the average or typical grocery store here, how that could possibly work for them. I mean, I think there's so much needed around that, from infrastructure, in order to make this viable, fully viable as a delivery method. I think you will have a situation where, with the rapid grocery delivery at the minute, I think that's likely. You may find a situation where these start to combine, not just grocery, but rapid delivery generally for other items as well. And maybe it may not be 15 minutes, maybe it may be 30 minutes, maybe it may be, 1 hour delivery, but with a combined rapid delivery system, that starts to open up the viability of these operations then for other players. Because I think just robotics, although it's very interesting, these delivery vehicles, very interesting. I'm not sure it's something that we are going to see as a standardized solution across the board, in the near future. I think it's part of a solution, and it's something that will continue to evolve and be adapted. But I think that will tie in very much along with the autonomous vehicles. Generally, I think there's a lot of infrastructure needed for that to be large scale viable, from my point of view.
Point well taken, Dave. Here.
The only thing I would add to that is, where is home delivery going and e-commerce in general? If you pay attention to what the experts are saying, which obviously we have to, home delivery or BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store, constitutes about 7 to 10% of the business today. By 2025, that's predicted to be 20% of the business. So yeah, it's going to continue to grow, and how the retailers, adapt to that change is going to be unique to each individual retailer situation, and depending on where they're at. So yeah, there will be more penetration of delivery and pick up, in store. And we'll just have to see how things evolve over that.
If I can just add to that as well, Dave, the challenge with, the click and collect or the third party, the challenge with that for a lot of retailers is you know, you lose the opportunity for impulse buys when you're in the store as well. And that, I mean, that's a key part of the business, is that impulse buy. I mean, that's why the stores are, you know, laid out the way they are with product positioning. Is the impulse buys, the additional spends that people, you know, pick up as they go through the store. You lose that then as an operator, you lose that opportunity. And I think that's why, you know, for me, the drive towards the experiential part is where you would get people into stores to focus on the bits that are more enjoyable and get additional spend out of that part of the business. But I think that's a big challenge for grocers going forward. Yeah.
And I'd add, Brendan, too, again, you know, speaking generationally and culturally, you know, if I'm on Facebook or whatever, you know, metaverse you happen to be in, you might be getting ads for your local grocer for products that are impulse purchases or in the, you know, in the application. So there's lots of different opportunities to do this. I'll tell you today, there are people that spend the money on this today because they don't have the time or they're not able, you know, to shop the way that they want to. So it certainly happens today. And the question, you know, is going to be, what is the impact of generational cultural change, finance, and the business model? You know, that, you know, I think Brendan and Dave covered a lot of the rest, but it's hard to predict. You know, COVID was very difficult for anyone to have predicted. And so, you know, we could have other black swan events that could accelerate it, right? We moved e-commerce by 5 years, according to most folks, over the past year.
Yep.
And so it's hard to predict.
Yeah.
And
Right.
bonus points for working in metaverse there. That was very good.
I was actually going to end on that note, but we haven't got metaverse in here, you know. It's all and is there any last thoughts, right, that you guys want to share with the audience on anything that is of interest to you, grocery related? And maybe Kira, do you want to share your any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I really encourage folks to figure out, you know, how to work together. Like I'd love to partner with Dave and Brendan and Aspa and others so that we can bring a lot of the capabilities that, you know, these sort of large vertically integrated retailers have, so that, you know, we can create a level playing field and more choice for customers and communities.
That's awesome. I love that statement because, you know, the center here is trying to democratize retail in our own little ways. And so that concept resonates very, very well. Thank you, Kira. Brendan, Dave?
Just like, you know, I said earlier on, I think these are very exciting times. I think, you know, like you said, the amount of advancement that's happened in the last 12 months, 18 months in particular, has been huge, and I think we're really only at the start of that. I think there's very exciting times ahead, really, you know, within this, because change has to come. The economies, you know, in order for the efficiencies to come into the business to manage it, things have to keep changing. They need to move forward, and I think it's an exciting time. It's going to be very interesting to watch, you know, really how the market plays out in the coming years, and, you know, which competitors have adapted to the technologies, have adapted to the new market trends, and yeah, for the long-term success.
I'm glad you used change, because I really kind of wanted to end on my favorite quote that I just adopted 7 years ago when I moved out of, you know, healthcare and into retail, and realized how backwards retail was in the technology space. And I'm going to butcher his name. It's General Eric Shinzeki. He's retired U.S. General, and his quote is, "If you don't like change, you're going to dislike irrelevance even more." And I think that is something that we all have to just sit back and think about. You know, you've got to change. And you have to accept it, because if you're not willing to accept change, you will be irrelevant.
Hey, I think that's a perfect ending spot, right? Change is your friend, adapt. We're all trying to adapt. Thank you all for being here. I learned a lot. It was very, very insightful. I hope you learned a lot as well. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks.